Welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. My name's Terry O'Connor. I'm from the University of York, and I'll be chairing this evening. It's my great pleasure, I must say, it really is a great pleasure to welcome you in person, real people, rather than little squares on a screen, which has been the case for the last couple of years. It's very nice. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I would just draw your attention, if I may, to the evacuation slide, which has been lurking there, and you've all been, I'm sure, trying to read the small print. In the very unlikely event of an emergency, please just follow the steward's instructions and leave the venue by the nearest available exit. That is the gist of it. Won't, of course, happen. Oh, and if you haven't already put your phone on silent for the session, now would be a very good moment to do that, please, because this evening of all times, we don't want any mysterious voices coming out of the ether. Which gives me a very nice link to introduce our speaker this evening, who is Dr. Irving Finkel, who is I have the phrase here, a British philologist and Assyrologist. There you go. Currently the assistant keeper of ancient Mesopotamian script, languages and culture in the Middle East Department at the British Museum in London, where he specialises in cuneiform inscriptions on tablets of clay from ancient Mesopotamia. My microphone dipping in and out. Yes, I thought it might be, yes. It's very interesting. I can hear it. If I just move it down a wee bit. Now, I'll project anyway, there you go. Tablets of clay from ancient Mesopotamia and words from millennia ago from people who seem strangely human. Today, he's here to talk about his most recent book, The First Ghosts, Most Ancient of Legacies, a book which I'm sure is fascinating. Whether we personally believe in ghosts or not, the belief in them is something that runs right around the world through all human cultures. And perhaps few of us are aware how far back the origin of ghost stories and just how deep in time this whole belief goes as well. So to give us an introduction to the deep and complex story of ghosts, please welcome Irving Finkel.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Extraordinary. Right. Well, I, as you have just heard the grim news, am a curator in the British Museum in London, and I've been there the whole of my adult life and a good part of my infancy. And one of the things about the British Museum, never mind the rubbish in the press, is it's full of the most marvellous, marvellous things which are going to stay there forever. And among them are something like 130,000 pieces of clay inscribed in cuneiform writing of all kinds of subjects that cover more than 3,000 years of time. And this is the oldest kind of writing we know about so far from archaeology. So, two crucial facts. There won't be many crucial facts. One of them is this is the only map I've ever seen where you can get everything at a glance without thinking. It's the blue bit in which we are interested, Iraq. Many people in Britain get confused between that and the green bit, Iran, because the first three letters of both names are the same. So just hold on to that. It's from Iraq that this cuneiform writing system originates and has bequeathed to us, people who are long dead, their language is long dead, the most extraordinary resources. So on the right is a typical example of a cuneiform tablet written in about 1800 BC. You can see the lines of writing, they go from left to right, and they get a lot of writing on a simple tablet. And those are the things of that kind, which are the resources from which it is possible to talk about something as ethereal and complex as ghosts. So before we go any further, before anybody's thought of leaving, I just want to show you a little teensy bit of cuneiform. So we have the word ghost in English. And in Mesopotamia, there were two languages which existed side by side, the Sumerian and the Babylonian, they coexisted and they were written with the same writing system. So when you look at a tablet, you have to know enough to tell which language it's written in. And we know a lot about both of these languages, including the fact that the word for ghost in Sumerian, which is the older of the two languages, and we know about it from at least 3200 BC, the Sumerian word for ghost is gedim. And the interesting thing is that the Babylonian word etemu, which is there too, is a loan word. You can see the relationship between the two words. Just as we have loan words from Latin, Greek, and French in English, so in ancient languages, words move from one to the other and sometimes underwent a slight change. So if a Sumerian came in the door, I'm not holding my breath, but if this were to happen, gedim would be the word which made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Now, the reason I want you to look at this, and there will be a short test, 1 in every 3 people leaving the room will have to reproduce this from memory. Note the following points, that A, there are vertical wedges, there are horizontal wedges and diagonal wedges. They're all made of wedges. Now, underneath you've seen I've written the fraction for a third, which is 2 little verticals and 1 long horizontal. So that is the sign which means a third. And next to it, I've written 2 phonetic signs, Ish and Tar, which, if you put them together, spells the name Ishtar, which is the goddess of love and war, of whom I hope you have heard. So you can spell the word Ishtar with those 2 signs, which, as well as meaning the goddess of love, also means any old goddess or female divinity. So if you look here, you will see that the fraction for a third and the signs for Ish and Tar are amalgamated into one, the message being that the ghost is something of 1/3 female divinity. So the Babylonian conception was, or the Sumerians too, that you had the clay, the lumpish, heavy clay mixed with blood. That was the thing that rots in the earth, but the bit that was the person which was to survive afterwards was made of divine femininity. This is not a political statement. Now, the Mesopotamians invented many things, but they did not invent death. It was already well known. And they buried people in the ground, and the principle was that when buried in the ground, they went down below, and when they were down below, they were supposed to stay there. And by and large, they did, but not always. So in order to present a veneer of science myself, this is a technical archaeological photograph. You can tell it's technical because it has a scale on it, although I don't know what scale it is. It might be 50 feet, 100 feet, I have no idea. And pots and things like that. You know, that's what archaeologists have in order to describe ancient life, ancient thoughts, ancient persons. They haven't got a hope in hell of understanding anything, because the only way to find out about the dead is what they wrote down on their tablets. Never forget this truth. When the dead were restless and they came back, the Mesopotamian cuneiform resources include a whole spread of different sorts of documents to confront this problem, to recognize it, to drive the ghosts away, and do other things too. And I brought you some pictures of 6 different specimen writings to give you some idea of the place of this in ancient life. So if a ghost came back, there were lots of spells, and the first one is rather eloquent. It says, "You are the offspring of the wind. I've laid you in the grave. I've sent you down. Why did you not fear my solemn oath?" So this tells you that when somebody was buried and going down there, there was a very solemn oath, the point of which was to lock the lid. Another document which is very interesting and worth considering as part of the thesis that the people whose inscriptions we are going to be looking at are people whose motives and ideas we can understand because they are quite familiar to us, is this second inscription, which was on not a tombstone, but something comparable. So somebody wrote this: "If ever, a long time from now, far into future time, in the days to come, anyone should find this tomb, may he not clear it away, may he restore it. May that man who finds this not despise it, rather he should say as follows: this tomb I shall certainly restore it. And may the favour he did be requited him. Above, may his omens be propitious, and below, may his ghosts drink pure water." So those final two clauses are very revealing, because omens and the question of giving the ghosts what they need are the crux of the whole thing. Written sources, the written sources bring to us about what really happened in these ancient societies. For example, you probably know that the Mesopotamians had a great weakness for telling the future. They took omens from every single thing you could imagine, something accidental, something deliberate. It was one of their major intellectual efforts and had all sorts of repercussions in the world to come thereafter. I mean, the classical world. But the thing is, among all the omens, there are lots to do with people seeing ghosts. So it's a single line: if a man sees a ghost in his bedroom, such and such a thing will happen. Okay, so that is in itself not very significant, but there are hundreds of lines recorded like this, whether it's in one room of the house or another room of the house, or it's somebody you know or it's somebody you don't know, and if the ghost speaks to you and doesn't speak to you. And what has happened is that over the centuries, the people whose responsibility for analysing the trouble with ghosts had led them to compile a kind of massive index of all the possible types of ghosts and their behaviour that might be expected. And the point of it was that when you knew what sort of ghost it was, this enabled you to select the most appropriate way of dealing with it, what kind of ghost it was, when it was seen, what it did. The thing people most hated was ghosts speaking. So, we understand that when a person passed away, there were rituals that had to be carried out, and they were expected to go down into the underworld and stay there. So we have lots of practical, everyday texts which cover this, and then we have a literature, mythological literature, which refers to the same subject. And what I've got on the screen here is a really splendid example of the latter. This is called the Descent of Inanna, or sometimes the Descent of Ishtar, that same Ishtar we referred to before. And this thing on the right, which is sometimes called the Queen of the Night, I'm quite certain is a picture of Inanna, and you will see why. What happens is that Inanna has a lover called Dumuzi, and Dumuzi is down in the underworld and trapped. So she goes down into the underworld to deal with her sister Eresh Kigal, the queen, to retrieve Dumuzi and bring him up. Now this diagram here is something to bear in mind. You see this grotesque piece of tomfoolery. It is supposed to show the route from Kutha, which is where the entrance to the underworld was on the ground in Mesopotamia, indicated cleverly by a ziggurat, a palm tree, and a gate. And the gate opens onto a long route all the way down, of which there are 6 others. There are 7 gates altogether. Now, when this story is recounted in Akkadian, what happens is this. Now, remember that Ishtar is the most beautiful woman who has ever been seen anywhere, because she is in charge of love and death and hatred and all those other familiar domestic things. And you can imagine she must have been a corker. So what happens here is that as she reaches the first gate, there is an officious kind of person who says, "Ah, your ladyship, you have to take off your tiara, for example. And Inanna says, why do I have to take off my tiara? And the guy says, oh, this is the local custom. You have to do this, my lady, like that. So she does. Then she goes on to the next gate, and the next gate, and the next gate. And by the time she gets to the end, she has no clothes on at all. Now, when I was a student, when I started Assyriology at university, I had a crusty, celibate, strange professor for whom the question of nudity applied to young women was neither here nor there. It was just a matter of grammar. But I remember being agitated reading this description, which is quite clear in the occasion, and visualizing this goddess undergoing this experience. And then when the British Museum bought this picture of Inanna at an auction, the whole thing became alive, because you can see she has a helmet, a divine helmet. She has wings and life symbols. She was once painted. She's standing on lions. There are owls. And she has feathered feet, because people in the underworld are described as hanging about like this, like penguins in the gloom, like birds hunched over. And I think the point was that Inanna, when she was down there and trapped, the bird stuff started to take over. So this is the only nude, full-frontal Mesopotamian goddess we have. And the story is the only time when we have a nude, full-frontal goddess to read about. So it seems to me inexpressibly obvious that this is, in fact, Inanna. Now, I have a very serious conviction, which has come from wasting my life reading this kind of mad stuff, that human beings in antiquity are no different from human beings today. They might look different and eat different things and have different languages, but underneath the Homo sapiens is Homo sapiens and always will be. And one of the points which I think substantiates this claim so lucidly is precisely this situation that a tremulous and beautiful young woman meets in front of a window an official. And the official smells immediately a chance for wicked exploitation of the female sex. And he says, you got to get undressed. Well, there's no rule like that anywhere. It was just him. He was a bastard. And the next window was the same, and the next window was the same. And if ever you've tried to buy a railway ticket in Bombay, you will know exactly what that is like. So let's imagine that things are bad, and someone in the family has died, or somebody you don't know is coming back and tormenting you, and it starts off with this feeling there's somebody there, all that kind of nonsense, and then one day you're making a salad in the kitchen and you see a ghost. And it's, I think, from the descriptions of that kind of stuff, it was rather like us making a salad in the kitchen and a mouse running across the kitchen floor. Because that happens to even the cleanest households, of course. If a mouse does run across the floor, you jump like Billy-O, and then you think, damn, I've got to do something about it, and what a lot of trouble that's going to be. So it's shock plus irritation and the feeling that something has to be done. And that encapsulates entirely the Babylonian feeling about seeing a ghost. And the reason that that is the truth is that this is a society where you don't have people who believe in ghosts and who don't believe in ghosts. And you certainly don't have people arguing at the bus stop about whether ghosts exist or not. Because everybody, from the king to the lowliest beggar in the kingdom, takes ghosts for granted as part of life. And this is the crucial framework in which this ancient literature flourished. It wasn't an artifice, and it certainly wasn't something written to delude us, but the clear picture is that this was part of daily life, and if you were unlucky, you had this kind of trouble. Well, you have a job to put this across as a description of London, very possibly of York too, but there are many places in the world where this is still exactly the situation, that people take ghosts for granted. So, when you have this thing making you jump, the first thing you can do is go down to the souk, where all the people who made things and sold vegetables were together, and get one of these amulets. So you can see it's a sort of almond shape. It has a hole through the middle. And it says it's a spell of Marduk, who's the king of the goats, king of the gods. Spell of Marduk. It says, "Ghosts, do not keep appearing to me." So it doesn't say, "Don't appear to me." It says, "Don't keep appearing to me." And this is something which in the Babylonian verb you can express in that way. So we can take it that the person who went and bought this amulet and had it made had already seen a ghost, and it was coming back, and it was beginning to get on their nerves. It was beginning to be intolerable. And so this was the first port of call to wear one of these things, humble it might be, which with the name of Marduk on it would hopefully banish them back where they came from. And the funny thing is, in the British Museum, sometime in the 1880s, these two things, they're about an inch long or something, came in with thousands of other things in a crate. And, of course, nobody took them very seriously because they were so wee and they were quite hard to read, and nobody ever looked at them. And then when I started hunting around in the museum for things to do with ghosts, those were just red-hot wonderful because they're totally informal, real-life things that normally never survive. And it gives you a kind of idea of the front line against ghosts. So let's say, having done that, nothing happened. The next step was you could get a special amulet. So this is a whole different kettle of fish because this amulet is carved into obsidian, which is volcanic glass. It doesn't grow in Iraq. It must have come from Afghanistan. It must have been a very expensive piece of stuff. It's broken at the top where there was a line. And it has 4 lines in it of very interesting language. It reads, Zizig nuedesh sagish luabdash. Now, a normal Assyriologist who knows about Sumerian and Babylonian would take one look at this and run away because it sounds so barbaric and so strange. But in fact, what it is Sumerian words made to look ancient. They kind of oldified them, because I wrote underneath the sort of thing these lines mean. Among living things, which is zizig, do ye not come up, raise thy head, ye corpse. So it's kind of certain, I think, that that's what the core of the words mean, but they've been dressed up in such a way that they have a hoary antiquity about them, which then lends them additional power. So that when the ghost, or whoever it is they're directed, it is a ghost in fact, sees these words, the realization on their part is not only are these rather good, dangerous spells, but they've been going for ages and ages and probably are very effective. So it's a kind of psychological boost of the simplicity of the words in order to reinforce the effect. And on top of it, the writing on this piece of obsidian is archaic writing. It's about 1,000 years older than the object itself. So when the sophisticated person produced this amulet and carved these special words, they are all also in the writing old forms of the signs. So it's quite it looks like nothing on earth, but when you disentangle it, it's a very revealing and typical Mesopotamian thing. And then I just have to show you this. This is something I think is marvelous. You see this horrible-looking tablet. You see it in a car boot sale, you wouldn't give 5p for it, probably. Well, it was written in... Actually, you do find one in the car boot sale, you phone me immediately, okay? It was written in 2042 BC. And this is the gist of the message. It says that Zimzilach, who is an Elamite dog warden, received a dead donkey at Drahem in southern Iraq. This is not the sort of thing that gets into the newspaper today, but it is very, very significant. Elamite is the name of the persons who lived in ancient Iran across the border. So this Zimzilach was an Elamite person, and he was a dog warden. Now, this is a serious thing because there's a kind of extremely dangerous and uncontrollable hunting dog that grows on trees in Iran, but not in Iraq. And the rulers of the city-states in Sumer around 2000 BC got blokes to come from Persia with these dogs to be security agents. At night, they patrolled the perimeter of the temple and inside the city walls with these man-eating dogs this kind of high. And it's only their trainers from Elam who could control them. So this fellow Zimzilach, with his funny name, lived in southern Iraq and was in charge of the dog unit, and presumably the dead donkey was part of their lunch. Now that's one thing. So that's 2042 BC. Now, in Mesopotamia, ancient Iraq, people always lived in the same places. So what starts out in 10,000 BC is just a flat piece of land, very gradually builds up and builds up like this until you have a kind of artificial mountain full of archaeology. And this is a universal thing in ancient Iraq. They're called tell mounds. You see them wherever you go. Now, the corollary of this is the following. If somebody dug up, was digging on the top level of a tell mound, drains or a granny flat or something which required deep structure, they would come down in their time on archaeological material just as they do today. And somebody must have found a tablet with this guy Zimzilach's name on it and 3 other guys as well. And what happened was this. If you look at lines 1, this is about ghosts. I know you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Look here. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see these lines. One goes Zimzilach, Zikilach, Chuchlach, Chochtila. And the next one goes Zibshilach, Numelach, Chatilach, Guchlach, and so forth. There are 4 amulets from the first millennium where the names of 4 Elamite dog wardens from at least 1,500 years before have passed from being unintelligible, strange words into magic. So these words are learned by heart by the exorcists because they know from their teachers and from before that Zinzilach, Zichilach, you recite these words and all the ghosts scatter like anything, partly because they thought they lived sometimes in Elam. So what is really interesting are 2 things. If you don't think they're interesting afterwards, you can boo me as if I was the Prime Minister. First is this, that you know what Chinese whispers are, that you have somebody at one end of the room and they send a message around, and by the time it gets back to the beginning, it is garbled, sometimes beyond recognition. Well, in these names, you have the same kind of garbling. In other words, the 4 of them are more or less clear, but because nobody knew what they meant, and they were learnt by rote, then they got increasingly garbled. So this is a perfectly natural thing, and it is very interesting when you have powerful magic words which you can show incorporate garbling as part of it. Because theoretically with magic, the words have to be spot on and needle sharp to be effective. But the other thing is this. This stuff is mumbo-jumbo. To the Babylonian exorcist or an Assyrian exorcist, these words, very powerful things, are mumbo-jumbo. And we have the same conception. Mumbo-jumbo is in fact mumbo-jumbo because nobody really knows what mumbo-jumbo or abracadabra really mean. They are just things which have this redolence of power. And what is amazing is A, follow me closely, this is the oldest example of mumbo-jumbo in the world. And B, we know where they got it from and they didn't. So I'm going to read you a couple of spells just to get you in the mood. So now we're in a situation where there's a domestic home. This is how, let's say, in the time of Hammurabi, 1800 BC, people lived in these houses. So you have built around a central courtyard. The grandfather would be there and the sons, and when the sons got married, their wives would come and there'd be kids all over the place. It must have been ghastly. And then they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the middle, there was a courtyard where very often people were buried under the floor, sometimes with a corbelled tomb that you could get into, sometimes they were just buried in the floor. But it's very often the case that the dead in a family were jolly close by. So this is a spell and ritual. Incantation. Dead persons. Why do you keep appearing to me, you whose cities are ruin heaps and are mere bones, with apologies to our chairman? I will not go to Cutha, the ghost's assembly point. In fact, I will not go to Cutha, the ghost's assembly point, because that's where the gate is to the underworld. And he's not going, and the ghosts are going, come with us, like that. You are conjured away by Queen Abbatu, Queen Ereshkigal, which is Inanna's sister, and Ningeshtin Anna, the scribe of the gods, whose stylus is of lapis and carnelian. And she had the records about who was in or out. So ghosts who weren't where they should be, Ningeshtin Anna made a note with her special stylus. So this is a spell against constantly seen dead persons. And it's quite human in a way that it's scornful, but he's also frightened and is rude to them, and he won't do what they say. And then this is a typical ritual of which there are many, many examples. You dig a pit towards the setting sun with a bronze spade. Then you throw in ditch water and some roasted grain flour into an ox horn. You char something else over the fire, stir it into the liquid, recite the spell we've just looked at, cast the liquid into the well, you pass the censer and torch by the afflicted person. So the thing that went into the well would go, of course, down and down and down, where it would do its most good. So there are lots of spells like this, and these weren't things that people did themselves, because if you had an amulet and that didn't work, you'd have to go to an exorcist. And there were exorcists, cheap and nasty and very expensive, like Harley Street, and depending on your means, you'd have to select the kind of person, but they would have a whole repertoire. There were manuals of things about how to get rid of ghosts of this type and that type, and this is a very simple one. So I have to show you this because life as a curator, as you can imagine, is full of pulsing excitement, money, girls, women, Hollywood, all that kind of thing. And it sometimes is a bit difficult to keep calm and eat your lunch obediently. And finding this tablet was the most extreme case, I think, that's happened to me in years. Because when I decided to write the book, I went through all the collection looking for ghost-type tablets, ghost tablets, and there were lots of them. And the one on the left, you can see, is broken on the front, but the back is complete. So when I found this tablet, I read the ritual and so that will have to go in. And then when I started work on the book properly, I discovered this, that you can see there's a panel in the middle with writing at the top and writing at the bottom with a drawing on it. And the drawing, it's a matter of, the thing is, I saw this tablet, and one day I held it under the light, and all of a sudden, these characters stepped forth. And from what's written on the back, I know what this is. The guy on the left is a ghost. And he's an old man, and I think an old man who didn't like to be alone and needed a good woman. So the analysis that the exorcist made in interrogating the family who have been victimized by this ghost, well, who could it be? Who's died recently? Who was a pain in the neck when they were alive? There's obvious kinds of questions. And probably they all arrived at the idea it must be a great Uncle Henry who was never safe in a lift with a woman. It's almost certainly him. So this is the proceedings that the exorcist, and this was an expensive job, this wasn't just some quick thing that you do in the market. This manual isn't the illustrated manual, a great rarity, works as follows, that you had to make an image of the ghost and an image of a woman. And they're made out of clay, and when they're sun-dried, they're undressed in robes, and she has frontlets and a necklace and all the things which are prescribed to make these two look as lifelike as possible. And then they are laid in a basket in a certain place at a certain time. And the idea is that this woman takes off this great uncle back down to the underworld, and they live happily ever after, as they used to claim in books for children. I don't know anybody who ever did live happily ever after, but it's worth bearing in mind. So the interesting thing about this is the following, that we know this is a ghost because it says so. So this is not some wise-ass curator thinking, oh, I know what this is. This is definitely a drawing of a ghost because it says so. And note carefully that the woman has a great upright spine and walking in a very firm kind of way. And if you look carefully at the drawing where we've indicated it, he has his hands shackled and she's got the other end of the rope. So she is going to take him down there for certain and look after him, and there'll be no escape. So this is somewhat humorous, if you like to think of it that way. It is somewhat remarkable. But the thing is this. I keep making these claims, but this is the oldest picture of a ghost in the universe. Where are you going to find a rival thing? And how do I know that's true? Because a special team of specialists in a team looked into the question. This was the result. Duh, duh, duh. This is in the next Guinness Book of Records as the oldest ghost in the world. How do you like that? That is my certificate. The man on the left is Mr. Guinness Book of Records. And on the right is my dear colleague who is the museum assistant holding in special blue gloves the tablet in question. And it's going to be in there. So if you get one for Christmas, forget the who could eat the most coconuts thing. Just leaf forward until you see this. No other cuneiform tablet has ever got in the Guinness Book of Records. So I wouldn't say I was boastful or big-headed or anything about it. It just gives me a really great feeling, that's all. It's just marvellous. And my colleagues are sick with jealousy. Now, another thing I have to show you while we're here. There is, if you buy this book, I mean, I strongly recommend it. In fact, I really couldn't put it more emphatically than saying I strongly recommend it. As a matter of fact, as an aside on the book, we've done a bit of research about buying books, and one of the things that's come to light is this interesting theorem that the ideal visitor to a history festival buys 3 copies of a given book. One goes on the bedside table, one goes in the lavatory for long-term visits, and the third goes into the car for traffic problems. And I think if you follow this principle, you will be well covered. And of course, if you happen to have any trouble with ghosts yourself, 3 copies of that book about your person will certainly bring an end to those difficulties. Now, this thing, I was going to say, in that book, there's lots of stuff about how to get rid of them and what they did. I can't tell you this because you'll all go to sleep. You won't go to sleep when you read the book, though, because it's absolutely fascinating. But here is the complete opposite. This is a manual for a necromancer, because once in a while it was considered necessary to summon a dead person to ask them a question. They had this conviction that you can do that, and also they had the conviction, which is even more interesting to me, that if you call up somebody dead in your family and ask them a question, that they're going to tell you the truth. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure, especially when you think how aunts sometimes hate their nephews, and I wonder whether that is a really safe kind of argument. Anyway, this is a two-volume work about how to bring up a ghost from the underworld in order that you can speak to it. So it flies against almost all the other hundreds of documents we have to get rid of the damn things, and this brings them up, and this is what you do. You have to get a skull, and I think probably it's the skull of the person you wanted to talk to, almost certainly, because if they are buried within the family plot, so to speak, it might be possible in the sort of Hamlet way to go digging, oh no, that's somebody else, until you, I don't know whether that's what they really did, but I think if you expect somebody to come and talk, they might want their own skull, their own teeth, that kind of thing. So what happens is, you anoint this skull with a sort of Macbeth witch type stuff all over, and burn a lot of incense, and then the sun god, who's called Shamash, who runs things in the netherworld, is supposed to bring the person up, that they will enter into the skull, and it says, Mimmata shalushu ikkabika, whatever you ask him, he will tell you. So I don't think this was done very frivolously. For example, imagine, just for a moment, under some massive stressful situation where this was the only thing that you could have recourse to, doing this probably not eating for 2 days, and some guy in a dressing gown with all this stuff hanging off him, looking like the devil, doing this special stuff, and up comes the voice, and then like that. It will make you kind of jumpy, probably. So I don't think they did it frivolously. The two things that I can tell you about this tablet are, A, they don't ask any of the questions on the tablet. It's just a way to get this happening so that then you can open intercourse with the dead person. But after the spell to bring up the dead, there's a whole load of things to get rid of them damn fast. Because the last thing you want to do is to have the ghost hanging around ever after. So this necromancy thing, there are very few examples of it in Mesopotamia, but of course, when you go into Greek and Latin sources, it's a well-established thing, and there's lots and lots of literature about it, and also in the Bible. One of the joys of being an Assyriologist and reading the Babylonian language, which is Semitic, is that sometimes when you read the Bible, instead of it being the Bible, it's just another text in a Semitic language, and you can look at it afresh. And one of the things which is very interesting to look at afresh is the whole story of the Witch of Endor, where Saul, facing defeat by the massed Philistines, is so desperate that he says to his courtiers, I have to find this, the Witch of it, where is she, where is she? And they take him, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, as I always think of it, they take the king up the mountain to the Witch of Endor, who is at the entrance to the underworld. And when you read the Bible, you don't think twice. I mean, I suppose no one's said much about it. They don't think much about it. But when you know what was going on in the rest of the world before, where there was an entrance to the underworld and where people could be imagined going up and down, then the thing that's described where Saul went is exactly in the same tradition. And what he calls the Witch of Endor is a lady whose name actually means the ghost mistress. The word is ghost mistress. She's not a witch at all. She's in charge of the ghosts. And she calls up Samuel. And Samuel comes up, who died recently, comes up and talks to Saul and tells him he's sunk. It's all over. I strongly recommend, if you don't buy my book and don't want to read it, reread the passage in the Bible, because it is so extraordinary the way it is described, because it is so credible. It's so matter of fact and incredible. And when when Samuel comes up, walking slowly, he doesn't say, oh, woe is you, death is upon thee. He says, why did you disturb me? I mean, that is the most amazing thing to me, that the prophet Samuel says, why did you, like he's watching television, eating on the sofa, the doorbell rings, you know that, Jesus. It's that sort of tone. Why? What do you want out of me, man? And then when he tells him the bad news, goes back again, the Witch of Endor makes them dinner before they leave. She won't let them go on their journey down the mountain. So if you read that thing, it doesn't take very long. It is astonishing how ill it fits in the context of the normal Bible, and how it stayed in there, I don't know. But of course, all the Jewish, Christian, and even Islamic people who have written about that thing have found the most admirable number of devices to explain it away that it never happened. It's all textual this and all textual this. But as far as I can see, the king of Israel went to talk to one of God's own personal prophets who came up and told him the answer, and it says so in the Bible. How can we not believe that if we have to believe everything else? And it is astonishing literally, because you have a window on, because all the things to do with ghosts and demons and devils are expunged from the Old Testament, where there are abominations and they're all knocked out, but we can be perfectly certain that all the people in the Middle East had exactly the same range of demons and devils, and it was their universal system. But in the Bible, it's all squashed out except this particular story. Okay, enough of this hectoring. Now, I want to say something else. 2 minutes, that's all I need. Firstly, you all know about Neanderthals, and you all know, of course, that many of us have a healthy dollop of Neanderthal DNA in their system. I know several people who have a very large dollop of DNA from a Neanderthal. Well, when I was writing this book, I poked around, and as our chairman said, the narrative about ghosts, that ghosts exist, that people see ghosts, is a universal in human literature and thinking as far back as you can trace it, wherever you trace it. It is an astonishing matter, and it's only the kind of peculiar world in which we live where something like that is put into a suppressed state. So I have an idea that the belief in ghosts is part of being human. And my argument for this is predicated on this and other skeletons of Neanderthal date, because I didn't know until recently that Neanderthals buried their dead in prepared circumstances, that's to say in excavated graves, and the bodies were laid out in a civilized kind of way. But also they had things with them. They had bits with them, not all of them, but some of them did. So if you have a conception that the stinking remains of a human being has to be buried as fast as possible in the ground, but you give them things to go with them into the unknown, the implication is that even at the outset of the dawn of the mind of Homo sapiens, the conception was that something survived after death. It's bound to be the case, if you have any kind of funeral deposit, that is the conception, that the bit of Uncle Henry is going somewhere, and presumably is going somewhere comparable where the same kind of needs would apply. Animals don't bury objects with their dead, although they do everything else that we do. But I think, since we can demonstrate at the stratum of Neanderthals that sometimes they were buried with objects, means that they believed that the essential living female component, as the Babylonians have put it, went somewhere. And my argument is, if it can go somewhere, it can come back. So my postulate is that, in fact, the whole idea of the dead going and not going has been with human beings from the beginning of time, and therefore is ineradicable. And when it comes to white-coat scientists who won't believe a word of it and walk out the room and you ask them a question, I have a solution for this as well. It's this house. It's on Dartmoor. So what we're going to do, if anybody wants to come and join in with me, we're going to get, say, 25 Nobel Prize scientists for a weekend staying in this house. And they'll arrive after dark, so they won't quite see how dilapidated it is, but as they settle in, look for the shower, it will become familiar. And when they've eaten and drank and gone to bed, they'll all be lying in what's supposed to be their beds in their horrible, miserable rooms, uneasily, with their white coats folded over the end of the bed, of course. And then we get a ladder, and we climb up the back of the house, and we go, ooh, and every one of those guys will wet themselves for certain. That is my conviction. So, there we are. That's what I wanted to tell you, in a nutshell, or I don't know what it was. But I have this idea, a serious idea, that you have an inheritance from the beginning of the species of this idea about what happens to the part of a person that is no longer in the body, and that it can come back. And I'm interested to investigate this, to find out whether we can go any further with it, because, as I see it, you have a stratum in human development where the Babylonians are a prime example, but there are many others, where all the population take the existence of ghosts for granted. There's no debate about it. It's part of normality. And then you have this stratum overlaid by monotheistic religion and science. So Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and science, both of which pushed what I regard as the earlier belief system downwards. And in some contexts, it's entirely crushed or lost from sight. But all round the edge of the non-urban world, it survives as strong as ever. So I think that's a remarkable matter. And my final word is that if anybody here has ever seen a ghost and didn't know whether they did, or they thought they were mad, or they told somebody and then they phoned for an ambulance, the thing is, when you discover that everybody in the world from the beginning of time has also seen ghosts, this is a slightly comforting thing to fall back on, and I strongly recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Irving. That's absolutely fascinating and engaging, and it's given us a lot of food for thought, particularly at the end. This last idea of a very deep-seated, very ancient belief in ghosts, that's really quite fascinating. I'm sure many of you here today will have questions, and we've got a bit of time. We've got to keep an eye on the clock, obviously, or we'll get thrown out or locked in or never be seen again or something. There are various people scattered around the margins of the room with microphones, so if you're called to ask your question, could you just wait until you've got a microphone in your hand? Then we all hear the question, not just the answer. And you know, it can be a bit tricky otherwise. So let's start off. Right. A hand gone up immediately from a lady here, and then there's a lady right up in the very back row, I think, yes, as well. For
the gods, as you might say.
Hi.
Yes.
Sorry. You talked a lot, like you said at the end, about how ghosts have always been a part of being human in our culture. Why do you think that is? Is it something to do with a fear of death, or is it just something that's very human?
Well, my own feeling is it's to do with human arrogance. It's to do with arrogance. Because, when you're a kid, when you realise you're going to die, it's a very difficult thing to come to terms with. You're going to stop dead. And this is a human quandary. To come to terms with your marvellous, wonderful self-person is going to finish. And I think that might have predisposed early thinking into the idea that perhaps it wasn't so bad after all, and everybody knew that the body had to be got rid of, and that this whoosh thing happened. But all the religions of the world believe in this thing coming out of going to heaven, going wherever it goes. All the religions refer to it as if it's to be taken for granted by them. In their preaching, in churches, all these religious contexts, this is what people believe, that it doesn't just stop with the clay. So I had a great idea when I was trying to finish this book, that if all the theologians in the world believe that the human spirit survives after death and goes somewhere, right, that suits me down to the ground, because that's half the story. And I think maybe we could have the idea that when somebody sees one, it becomes a ghost. But it's all the same thing, as far as I can. It's all the same thing. So if you completely disallow the idea of you have to get rid of all the talk about going somewhere, which is a staple of all modern religions.
That's a bit more food for thought, isn't it? There was a lady at the very back, I think. Yes, had her hand up. I don't know if we can get a microphone right up to the back of the room, can we? Yeah, that's it, right. And then there was a gentleman towards the front here as well, perhaps next. Yes, mic's going on.
Thanks very much.
It's arrived. Gentleman in the back row, I do apologise. The lights are shining in my eyes.
I don't mind whatsoever. When I think of ghosts, sometimes it calls to mind a person in a sheet or a Pac-Man ghost. I wondered, what are some early examples of ghosts taking on a sort of abstract, non-anthropomorphic form?
Well, I think all human ghosts take on anthropomorphic form. I don't know what the alternative would be. When people see ghosts and they describe it, it's a person in recognisable state. But I don't know what a non-anthropomorphic ghost would be. That's a whole different discipline. I mean, it's even more woolly than mine. I don't know how you would deal with it. One thing about the widespread nature of the belief, which is worth stressing, is that it's an almost universal thing, that the dead who are unhappy are troubled by the way they died or circumstances in their lives which were unresolved. So the deposit of non-closed affair, in one way or another, is responsible for the malaise of ghosts. And if you want to say, it's a kind of cliche. And the second cliche is that ghosts go back to where they used to be and fiddle around in their old house or with objects or in the stables. Or, I mean, you see this in the newspapers all the time, but originally in Mesopotamia it was the same idea, because that's how people lived, and it makes a lot of sense. But I'm not sure what non-anthropomorphic ghosts look like.
A person in a sheet, say, I don't know. I wondered how ghosts might be depicted as a sort of symbol, other than a human body.
Well, the only picture we have of anything is that one I showed you. And it's clear, I think, from the omens which describe people that they were wearing clothes. And they also distinguish, when they have all these omens, and there's a lot of really hard information which makes the thing more credible. They talk about people that you know and people you don't know. And that's one thing. So, for example, if the Assyrians go to war with the Egyptians and kill 20,000 Egyptians, a rational thinker in Mesopotamia would assume that all those dead Egyptians are going to be coming over and making a lot of trouble, like football hooligans. So the information we have is so patchy. But
So, a gentleman here has been waiting up. In order to facilitate things, have my microphone.
I hope it's not a stupid question. It's a detail. On that, the amulet that was from the much more expensive ritual with the lines of writing at the bottom and the ghost and the woman in front of him. The two scratch marks, what are they from? They go through the woman. They looks like they were made in wet clay, but
on the drawing,
yes,
I can tell you, they're from the circumstances under which the tablet was excavated. Because it was found in 1870 locally by somebody harvesting a tablet for sale. And in their exuberance, since it wasn't fired, see, if you have an unfired tablet, in the air, it is hard like leather. But if it's buried, it's moist. So if you're clumsy, you can efface everything. So it is a miracle, considering that there are two blows to the tablet, that so much of it is actually visible. Yeah. Yes, we've never fired it either. I mean, we often do fire clay tablets, but the surface is so frail that it would be too risky. It might all flake off and disappear. So I should have said that the white was done, obviously, with a computer. It wasn't me. One of my colleagues did it very carefully. We did it together to bring out, because otherwise you can't really see it.
I'm afraid the clock's against us.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen.
God damn it, we just started off, man.
No, I know. It's one of the tragedies, I'm afraid, of so many of these wonderful presentations that you think, well, another hour would be nice. And with the program's packed and so on, it becomes very difficult to do. There's a great deal there. What can I say? Thank you, Irving. It's been absolutely fascinating.
I've enjoyed myself a lot.
Wonderful, and such questions that we managed to get in have raised yet more information and more ideas, and certainly I think we'll go away this evening with all sorts of stuff rattling around in our heads, I think, and avoiding dark corners probably for the next few days. I'm sure many of you will be keen to get hold of a copy of the book, somewhat plugged, and but
well. Actually, Hodder don't do anything, so I thought if I don't do it, no one's going to do it.
Well, there is that, yeah. Yes, just to add to that, I must say, I found it absolutely fascinating. Our independent bookseller, Fox Lane Books, who are installed out here, have copies, and Irving will be signing for those who wish to. In English or in cuneiform?
Either, or any name you choose. Elvis Presley is often quite popular, so we can always do that.
So be careful what you wish for, you might get it. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming, and as I said, for enabling a live event rather than a Zoom event, which is really lovely. And thank you once again, Irving, for a really fascinating evening.
Thank you for your lovely set.